In Kuwait's history, Arabian horses were considered as precious animals, as the owners would take really good care of them by giving them food and shelter and protection, as they were considered very loyal animals and companions. They took people into battles and they provided travel means, and people relied on them to survive. Kuwait is positioned geographically between the east and the west, and it was considered as a major trading hub. Arabian horses were a big part of Kuwait's trade. The earliest record of horse trade in Kuwait was around 1860s. Around 600 horses were sold to India. There are 5 strains of the Arabian horses, and they are the Abiya, the Hadban, the Khailan, the Saglawi, and the Hamdani. And this all goes back to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he had a group of horses that he released to a nearby oasis to drink water because they're so thirsty. He called his battle horn, and only 5 came back. And these were the mares that were his favorite because they were so loyal, they came straight back to the Prophet Muhammad. And these 5 horses were called Al-Khamsa. Al-Khamsa means 5 in Arabic, and that's where all of the horses descended from. The horses had physical features that helped them deal with the hot climates of the desert climate, such as the dished face and the jibha, which helps them regulate their body temperature by taking in more air. The jibha is the bulge on the forehead, which is situated between the eyes, and it just provides a higher capacity of the sinuses, which helps it breathe more. Kuwaiti people back then relied also on the camels because they were used for transportation for long distances, since they have the durability of withstanding a long period of time without food and water. Alongside the camels, the horses were also used, but because they are not as durable as the camels with long distances, they were used for battles as they were swifter and faster. I mean, you can't really go into a battle with a camel. Horses used to be a necessity back then, but nowadays in modern times it has become a hobby and a passion. Generally now in Kuwait you'd see horses more involved in show jumping and races and endurance, but for the Arabian horse they are mostly used for showing. The interest in Arabian horses has increased in popularity in Kuwait, but the passion has always stayed the same.
Al-Hadar is a centre for the breeding and rearing of Arabian horses in Kuwait. Its aim, to preserve them, but also improve future generations. There are a lot of different breeds in Kuwait, but the most common one is the Arabian horse. Arabian horses are considered to be a part of Arab history, and their place in history is what it is because they're one of the famous breeds. Their historical significance means people, Arabs and otherwise, have always been interested in owning, rearing and improving Arabian horses. It also means helping to preserve their own ancestry. Arabian horses are generally a result of breeding programs. For example, the Egyptian horse is essentially one from the Arabian Peninsula that was taken to Egypt over 100 years ago. There, it was bred and numbers increased, so they became known as the Egyptian line. You also have the Polish and Russian lines. Ultimately, they too can both be traced back to the Arabian Peninsula, which is where they originated. There are 3 levels of showing competitions that we have here in Kuwait: local, Gulf and international. When it comes to competition, what makes Arabian horses distinct from other horses is their strength and their endurance. Not to mention their appearance, their beauty, charisma and personality. So one of the judging categories, in fact the first thing they look at, is their type, which relates to both charisma and personality, and what makes the Arabians so unique. There are also some very specific details that define their type, like for example the elegance of the face, the size of the eye. With some, the eye is round, with others it's more human-like. Also the eye socket, whether it's prominent in size or not, and if what we call the jibha is narrow or wide. Another thing that is focused on when judging the type is when the Arabian horse lifts its tail. This really adds to their charisma and personality. When they're showing off to an audience, they'll straighten themselves out, bend their necks and bring up their tails, neighing, moving and prancing in a flirtatious manner, really drawing attention to themselves. Competing on an international level is where the future lies for breeders and owners of Arabian horses here in Kuwait. It's what we aspire to. We want to compete vigorously and win medals to raise the name of Kuwait and hear our national anthem playing at venues worldwide. At international arenas, we can get a measure of whether we are advancing or not. If an Arabian horse competes from Kuwait, for example, in a competition in Europe, and it competes and places well, gets a medal, that's the proof we need that our breeding programs are heading in the right direction. It will also demonstrate the fact that we are succeeding in moving our programs forward in a conscientious and educated way.